This is Brighton's Royal Pavilion, built in the late 1700s by John Nash for King George IV when he was Prince Regent. It was this seaside retreat, and why not? Brighton's a great place to come and visit for the weekend. And it's also one of the most photographed buildings in the UK. But most tourists just come along, point their camera at it, take a snap, and done. Moved on to the next location. But I reckon we can do better than that. And then look at where you like the way this takes across. If you really want to liven up your photos, look for a reflection. They always make them more interesting. Wherever I am around town, whether I'm shooting buildings or landscapes, I look for canals, ponds, rivers, even puddles after rain. They're nature's free mirrors. All you have to do is look down on the ground. But here's the extra trick. Most people just stand in front, see a little bit of a reflection, and then take their picture. But the reflections always look much better the closer you get to the surface. And I'm talking really close. Kneeling down will give you a much more attractive composition than standing up, but you can get even better still if you can get closer to that water surface. So be brave, hold on to your camera or your phone very carefully and get as close to the surface as you can. I'm talking about lying down. Right above the surface of the water, the closer you can get to it, the better. And I'm also using the optional grid lines on the screen to help me line up this shot and make sure that the towers are nice and straight and that the horizon line across the middle of the picture isn't squint. And just going down those extra few inches will turn a fairly average picture into a really spectacular one. When you photograph buildings, you normally stood on the ground in front of them looking up, but that causes a change in perspective. Literally, vertical lines begin to converge to a point at the top in the sky. Now that can look pretty good if you're photographing a huge building, a skyscraper in the center of a big city. But for some buildings it looks a bit messy. It's nicer when those vertical lines are actually vertical on your picture. Now of course you could stretch them out digitally, but the way to do it naturally, the way to do it optically, is to position yourself square on, face onto the subject. But of course for a building, that means increasing your height. You've got to look for something to stand on. Now you don't have to get exactly halfway up the building. I mean, that would be pretty difficult in many situations, unless you have a friend with a balcony that's opposite. But just standing on a bench, or a chair, or a fence, or even a tree can give you that additional height that you need. So I'm only about 2 meters above the ground, but it's made a world of difference in terms of perspective. I'm much squarer onto the building, which makes it much easier to make sure that those towers, those vertical lines are nice and straight. And to me, it's a much more attractive picture. If I want those converging lines, I want to be right underneath it and go for the extreme effect. If I can correct it, I want to correct it. Now the benefit of also raising your height is that you're above objects that are in front of you that could be in the way of your shot. There's a fence right in front of me here, no problem anymore. There's always lots of people in front of this building taking pictures of it, but from up here I'm shooting over their heads, so again I've cleared that obstacle. But there's an even better benefit from shooting under a tree like this, which is I can use the canopy above me, the actual branches and leaves, to fill an otherwise boring sky. It's nice and sunny, the sky's blue, but it's a bit of a plain expanse. But by aiming the camera a little higher, I can include some of those leaves in the shot, and it gives it a lot more interest. Whatever I'm taking pictures of, I'm always on the lookout for natural frames. They can be used to add interest to a shot, they can draw your eye into certain areas. They can also be used to fill an otherwise boring sky, whether it's a completely blue sky on a sunny day or a completely white sky on an overcast one. So around here, what I'm really looking at is this gate, because the pillars, the roof, they can all provide very nice framing for the subject behind it. They also allow you to handily obscure some things like construction work or people who are not going to get out of the way of your shot. So here I'm using this post to cover up some scaffolding work that's going on. Natural retouching, who needs Photoshop? But I also want to use this roof area and a post on the right to change the composition. And just look how even very subtle movements, left and right, can really change how that picture looks. And the trick is to just move it around and explore the view until you find something that works for you. I really like a dramatic zigzag silhouette. The problem with taking pictures of large buildings is that you're inevitably at the bottom looking up at them. The lines converge, and while that can be an interesting effect, it's not always the effect that I want to achieve. I think buildings look much better when you square onto them, so you're actually looking at them in a more natural perspective. Now, if the building's only a couple of stories tall, that's not much of a problem. You could climb a tree, you could just stand on a fence. But when the building is one of the tallest in Europe, like the Shard over there, then you've got to get yourself higher. So I found myself a balcony 10 stories high on a building opposite, and the perspective is just so much better. I'm square onto the lower floors of the building. It also gives me a chance to look down at the ground around it. So I'm using the rule of thirds here to help me compose this frame. The rule of thirds tells me that I should position the horizon along this top line. And it looks okay, but of course rules are there to be broken. So if you prefer, you can angle up and have more of the sky, or angle down and have less of it. The rule of thirds would also tell me that I would need to position the Shard, the point of interest, where the lines intersect. But I quite like the way it looks in the middle, pointing up into the sky. Just one last tip before we leave here. A lot of people take pictures with their phones completely handheld, like this. Even when there's a handy balcony you can lean on. Well, not me. I mean, I'm freezing. It's cold up here. I'm shivering. I'm shaking the camera about. So I always look for somewhere to lean my hands. And it's a simple tip, but it really allows you to hold the camera much more steadily. You avoid camera shake, and it also makes it much easier to fine-tune your composition. I love taking photos of bridges, but why take them from the side when you could go underneath and get a much more interesting angle? The trick for me is to make sure that you're absolutely central to them. Geometry will kill or make this image. So I'm shifting left and right a little bit to make sure that I am absolutely underneath it, and using the grid guidelines on the screen to help line it up. I'm making sure I'm completely center to the bridge. If I move left and right, even by just a few inches, you can see that does actually change the perspective quite a lot. Once I've got the bridge central, I'm going to use the on-screen grid to apply the rule of thirds and work out how I want to compose this picture. I could either use the bottom third to position the riverbank, or use it to position the top of the buildings. But remember, even though it is called a rule of thirds, it's really a guide of thirds. Use it as a guideline. If you like it, take the picture. If you don't, just adjust it. I just use it as a starting point. So when you're taking pictures of buildings, take particular care over your composition. Think about your angle in relation to them. Are you on the ground looking up? Are you going to try and find a higher position to shoot them square on? Think about the sky around it. Do you want to fill it or make a feature of it? If you put these things in practice, you'll end up with much better photographs of buildings, ones you'll be really proud of.